Hello everyone and welcome to story time on Monday the 1st of February. Do you remember where we got to last time? Dinah was taking part in the Eddie Hare show and the others were held captive at the front of the hall by the prefects, and the headmaster had threatened to do horrible things to the others if Dinah didn't win the competition. And she'd worked out what was going to happen as well, how the headmaster wanted to take over the world. And she knew the plan, but she couldn't do anything about it. There was not much time left. Alec had answered his last question and had scored again. He was grinning. So the score is 9-9, Eddie Hare said. He ran his fingers through his curls. The tension is killing me. Will it be a draw? Everything hangs on the last question. Lloyd looked anxiously at Dinah. She was gripping the pepper pot so hard that he wondered it didn't crack, and she looked as though she were about to burst into tears. So, Eddie Hare bellowed, here we go, and it's a complicated one, so listen carefully. I woke up and found I had lost my memory. I couldn't even remember what year it was, so I asked a man who was walking past. He told me, if you multiply my age now by twice my age next birthday, you will get the number of the year we are in. And I can tell you that I don't remember Queen Victoria, but I hope to live to the year 2000. Got it? Dinah nodded. She was just about to open her mouth to give the answer, but before she spoke, she looked across at Lloyd. And he knew that he could not let her do it, even if it meant being killed. The idea of having the whole country run by the headmaster forever was too horrible. Frantically, he shook his head over and over again until it felt as though it would fall off his neck. Dinah shut her mouth again. Come on, Eddie Hare looked at the clock. You can have a clue if you like. You only score half a point then, but that's enough to let you win. Do you want the clue? Give it to her, the headmaster said sharply. He was looking incredulously at Dinah. The clue is this. Eddie Hare looked down at his piece of paper. By the way, the man added, I'm not quite as old as my cousin, Winston Smith. Got it? Dinah nodded sadly, as though that fitted in with what she thought, but she still did not say anything. Glaring at her, the headmaster looked down at the children in the hall and cleared his throat as if he were about to speak. Lloyd braced himself. Here it came, the end. Sorry, H, he thought. I couldn't protect you after all. This is more important. Then, from the other side of Dinah, came an excited yelp. Lucy, who had sat silently in her chair all through the quiz, was bouncing up and down. I know the answer, she yelled. I know it. Winston Smith's the name of the man in that funny book you told me about, Dinah. It's 1984. That's the right answer, Eddie Hare said gleefully. Well done, Titch. You've saved the day. As the giant panda appeared behind the chair of Manor Road's headmaster, Lloyd began to shake uncontrollably. Their own headmaster had reached up and taken off his glasses, ready for his turn to speak. Chapter 16. Look into my eyes. That's dealt with the losers, said Eddie Hare cheerfully, as the headmaster of Manor Road tried to unwind the eels that the giant panda had tipped over his head. Now, how about the winners? A fantastic performance, not a question missed. Come on, headmaster, tell us how you do it. With a feeling of sick defeat, Dinah saw the cameras swivel, pointing towards the headmaster. He smiled into them, his large green eyes alight, and he said softly, If you all look into my eyes, I will tell you. You must be feeling ready for some sense after all the crazy mess of this show. You must be longing to have everything sorted out tidily, everything settled for you. Forever, thought Dinah, forever and ever. How could she stop what was going to happen? If she did not, life would never be worth living again. But if she tried, it would mean death for everyone else in Splat. She could see Lloyd leaning sideways now, whispering to them, explaining what was about to take place. And, as they understood, they all gasped. "You are all feeling exhausted by the mess," the headmaster was saying into the camera. "Tired and weary and ready to sleep." Through her misery, Dinah felt this familiar sleepiness start to creep over her. And all over the country, people sitting in front of their televisions began to nod over their cups of tea, wondering why they were suddenly yawning. You can hardly keep your eyes open. With every second that passes, your eyelids are growing heavier and heavier. Millions of cups of tea in homes everywhere dropped to the ground unheeded as people slumped forwards in their chairs. In the hall, the audience nodded and Dinah's eyes began to close. She struggled hard to keep them open, but the lids dropped irresistibly. Then, just before they finally shut, she saw Harvey leap to his feet. He was pointing straight at her, pointing to the table in front of her. Muzzily, she looked at his lips, trying to see what it was that he was mouthing. If only she did not feel so tired. Harvey wagged his finger, pointing in a frenzy, and at last she managed to make out what he was saying. "In your hand!" Funny, she thought sleepily. Why was he interested in her hand? She looked down, forcing her eyes to stay open for a second longer. Oh yes, she thought vaguely, she was still clutching that silly red pepper pot with the black stripes. So sleepy. She gave a huge, exhausted yawn. Pepper? She thought. Then, Pepper! That was it! Dragging together all the energy she could muster, she forced herself agonizingly to her feet, wrenching the bottom of the pepper pot, and flung the contents as hard as she could straight into the headmaster's face. Then she sank back onto her chair, knowing that she could not do anything more to resist that creeping, soothing voice. But what had happened to the voice? It had stopped. For a moment there was silence, and she turned her head slowly sideways. The headmaster had gone purple in the face, his lips pressed tightly together, his green eyes bulging ludicrously. As she watched, his mouth was forced uncontrollably into an enormous, a stupendous sneeze. Achoo! As though the strength of the sneeze had blown away her sleepiness, Dinah suddenly found herself wide awake. And right across the country, people in easy chairs sat up and looked in bewilderment at the spilt tea on their carpets. In the hall, everyone stirred and gazed in amazement at the sneezing headmaster. His nose streamed, his eyes gaped ridiculously, and his head jerked backwards and forwards. Achoo! 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 Then, from all over the hall, unbelievably, came the sound of laughter. All the children were laughing at the headmaster. Dinah could see the powerless rage in his eyes, but he could do nothing to stop them. From time to time he tried to speak. He managed to stutter out, "Does," in an effort to give his command to destroy the straw dolls. But every time he got as far as that, another huge sneeze overtook him and he collapsed. Eddie Hare was gazing at him ecstatically, as if a sneezing headmaster was what he'd always wanted on his show. Raising his voice, he said, above the noise of the sneezes and the laughing, "Well, folks, beat that if you can for a way to run the school. You know what I always say about this show? You never know what's going to happen next." As the final music began, he winked at the audience and cartwheeled away across the stage. The headmaster was just beginning to be able to control his sneezes. He pulled a spotless handkerchief out of his pocket, mopped his face, and glared at Dinah with total hatred. "Do you realise what you've done, you stupid girl?" he gasped. "You have destroyed this country's chance of becoming the first properly organised, truly efficient country in the world." "No, I haven't," she said happily. "I've saved it from becoming a miserable place full of scared robots like this school. And I'm going to think of a way of saving the school from you as well." "The school?" The headmaster jumped to his feet and waved a scornful hand at the rows of giggling children. "That rabble! Do you think achoo! That I want to go on wasting my talents merely looking after them, when you've made a laughing stock of me? Achoo! I shall resign at once and let them all sink back into chaos. What's she going to do then? Dinah asked quietly. He stood over her, glaring down. For a moment she was afraid that he was actually going to strangle her in front of everyone. His large hands jerked, and his face was a mask of rage. Then he took a deep breath, and an unpleasant smile spread across his lips. Do you think I should be so foolish as to tell you my plans? No, Miss Cleverglass. You must find them out for yourself, if you are clever enough. You have defeated me this time, but I know I was meant for greatness. I shall succeed in the end. With a loud, scornful laugh, he stalked off the stage and began to stride down the hall between the chairs. As his black-clad figure went by, the children stopped laughing and glanced fearfully at him. He did not look either to the right or to the left, but passed them like a tall shadow. Halfway down the hall he suddenly stopped, his body shaking. Achoo! As if they had been released from a spell, the children began to giggle again, and Lloyd and Harvey grinned happily up at Dinah, while Ian, Mandy and Ingrid jumped up and danced a jig. But Dinah did not grin back. She found that her hands were trembling, and she followed the headmaster with her eyes all the way until the hall door closed behind him. How did the show go? Mrs. Hunter said, opening the door. We were going to watch it, of course, but I'm afraid we had a visitor. It was fabulous, marvellous, Lloyd said jubilantly, bouncing into the house. Can you save it? His mother said, frowning slightly. We want you all to come into the sitting room. There's something we've got to talk to you about. Then you can tell us all about it. Lloyd winked at Dinah behind his mother's back. She'd get a shock if we did, wouldn't she? He mouthed. Dinah winked back happily and walked into the sitting room and stopped abruptly. There on the settee was Mrs. Wilberforce, looking solemn. Hello, Dinah. Hello, Miss Wilberforce, Dinah said in a cold little voice. Miss Wilberforce sighed and looked at Mr. and Mrs. Hunter. I'm afraid you're right, she said. It doesn't look as though she feels at home at all, and I was so sure she'd feel happy and relaxed here. I don't think it's her fault, Mr. Hunter said sternly. I blame the boys. Lloyd stared round at them. What do you mean? What are you talking about? We're talking about Dinah, Mr. Hunter smiled apologetically at her. Mrs. Hunter and I like having you here. We've grown very fond of you, dear, but you don't seem to get on with the boys. You've been at each other's throats all the time, haven't you? So we've agreed with Miss Wilberforce that it would be better for everyone if you went back to the children's home. Dinah felt as though someone had hit her with a large lump of very cold ice. Her face stiffened. Yes, Mr. Hunter, she said in a small voice. But you can't, burst out Harvey. He stopped and looked helplessly at Lloyd. Lloyd sat down deliberately in a chair and looked round at the grown-ups. I think you're all mad, he said loudly. Why ever do you want to send Dinah away? Plum-coloured pumpkins. We want her here, for ever and ever. I think Mum and Dad should adopt her properly. Mr. and Mrs. Hunter goggled, their mouths dropping open. You like her? Well, of course, Lloyd said, as if it were a ridiculous question. I think she's fantastic, except, he grinned across at her, except for being a bit thick, of course. Dinah had gone rather pink and was staring at her feet. She did not speak until Miss Wilberforce said gently, Well, Dinah, how do you feel about it? In a choking voice, as though she could hardly speak, Dinah said, Please, oh, please. That's all right then, Lloyd said in a satisfied tone. Now, please, can we have something to eat? We're all absolutely starving. His mother looked at him in bewilderment. But you took a packed tea to school. You can't be hungry again. Whatever have you been up to? Lloyd, Harvey and Dinah looked at each other and grinned. Oh, nothing much, they said in perfect unison. And that is the end of The Demon Headmaster. So, tomorrow we will start a new book, and I have chosen another demon, but this time it's The Demon Dentist. It's a David Walliams book, which we were going to read in school this term, but as we're not all together, I thought it'd be nice if we could share it online in the afternoons. So, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at the start of The Demon Dentist. What will happen with that one?